NFL Divisional Round betting breakdown. 8 teams remain, with 4 to be sent packing this weekend, and the other 4 taking one step closer to the ultimate prize. This week's guest, an ultimate prize when it comes to betting content, predictive analytics expert Ed Feng, founder of thepowerrank.com, where you can find football betting with a PhD edge. And on the platform formerly known as Twitter, you can follow Ed at thepowerrank. Ed, welcome back to Props and Hops.
Matt, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to talking about a pretty awesome set of 4 football games.
Yes, hopefully more excitement than we saw throughout much of Wild Card weekend. And for the purposes of this show, we will follow a format similar to last week's playoff run through for the Wild Card round, going game by game, talking some bets along the way. So let's get right to it. First up, Saturday in the early window, we've got Houston at Kansas City. Chiefs currently laying 8.5, total 41.5. And Ed, as a starting point for this game, I'd be curious for your thoughts around talk of the Chiefs getting a so-called playoff bump, thinking Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and other key cogs well rested entering this game. Also a boost from perimeter playmakers on both sides of the ball, considering on offense, wide receiver Hollywood Brown marking his 3rd game back from injury, better acclimated to the offense, and defensively, cornerback Jalen Watson returning from injury. So how do you view Kansas City right now relative to the Chiefs' regular season body of work?
That's a good question. I'm not particularly high on Kansas City because they really haven't shown, the success in the regular season. I think the story was a lot different last year, where the defense was excellent, right? Top 5 unit, if I remember correctly. And the defense hasn't been as good this year. They're closer to NFL average, and they've had to deal with some injuries, and getting Watson back is going to be very good. Although, I mean, you do have to question how much he's going to play this week. Mm-hmm. There was a point where my numbers said that Kansas City was pretty good at stopping the run. That has changed. Okay, so it was a little bit surprising that Kansas City, with the same personnel that they've essentially had the last couple of seasons, was all of a sudden the top 5 unit in stopping the run when I looked at success rate adjusted for opposition. They've massively regressed. They're back towards NFL average, which is honestly pretty good compared to the last couple of seasons when they would be in the bottom 5 in those types of metrics. And, the offense kind of statistically looks similar to past years. They're pretty successful on a play-by-play basis. Or they're pretty good at having success on a play-by-play basis, but just not a lot of explosives there. When I look at yards per pass attempt and I adjust for opposition, they're actually below NFL average, which is not good. So, yes, can this team win the Super Bowl? For sure. And let's talk about another thing. Record in one-score games, right? 11-0 in one-score games this year. And everyone's screaming about regression, or at least should be a little bit. And I don't think that we should necessarily think it's regression to 500. Patrick Mahomes is the key here, right? Like, when you have a player like that is an experienced yet still young playmaker that can also make the decision to pull the ball down and run, and can make those decisions in the last couple of minutes, you're not necessarily going to regress to 500, right? You do have the best player in the league at the most important position, but you're also not going to continue to go 11-0, right? And we saw those close calls against the Denvers, against the Las Vegases of the world, where they very, very well could have lost those games. And so I don't think this team is as strong as in past years. In terms of the receiving core, yes, it's nice to have Hollywood Brown back, but it's been a tough team to predict in terms of who's going to get the ball. That seems to change every week. I know this since I actually started playing fantasy football for the first time in my life with my 13-year-old son this year. And having Xavier Worthy was a roller coaster ride all season. And he probably had some of his best games after we were knocked out. So, I'm not particularly high on Kansas City kind of moving forward. I do think they're rightfully more than a touchdown favorite in this game. This is a Houston team that has kind of struggled to throw the football all season. And I don't think that, even though they had a nice game last week against a very good Chargers defense, I don't think that necessarily changes too much. And So yeah, I mean, I don't think Kansas City can get enough explosives to really cover this big number. I think it's a pretty big number. So I would lean Houston, but not particularly excited about the spread in this game.
All right, so a lean Houston's way for you. We'll see if there's anything that might be a bit more actionable when we get to the night game on Saturday. Washington at Detroit. Lions currently laying 9.5, total an astronomical 55.5. And Ed, as a jumping off point for this one, I feel like Washington is a horseshoe, a rabbit's foot, and a four-leaf clover all in one. If we want to look at their fourth down stats this season, regular season, 20 of 23, 87%. That's an NFL record for any team with more than 10 fourth down attempts in a season. In the wild card round, a mere 60% for Washington, going 3 for 5 on fourth down. They also won the turnover battle, the game-winning field goal doinked in off the upright.
Yeah.
And that was nothing new for Washington this season. They had the Hail Mary to beat Chicago. They won in Philadelphia despite committing 5 turnovers, due in part to Jalen Hurts exiting that game in the first quarter with a concussion. And they clinched their playoff berth with a win over Atlanta, thanks in large part to Raheem Morris' clock mismanagement and winning the overtime coin toss. With all that said, I don't mean to undermine everything Jaden Daniels, Dan Quinn, and company have accomplished this season. There's plenty of skill to go along with some uncanny luck. But Ed, is it fair to ask whether the clock is about to strike midnight on Washington's magic carpet ride this season?
I think it's very fair to ask that. Definitely agree with all the points that you made with stats about the Washington Commanders. So actually, let's put some numbers on it. I actually don't like it when people go on shows and don't talk about, especially when they're quantitative people, like what they actually predict. I have Detroit by 9.2 points, so I'm pretty close to the market on this. But the one thing I will note is that about halfway through the season, I threw out the prior to the Washington Commanders simply because Jaden Daniels was outperforming any type of expectations that we could have had for the rookie. And he's been unbelievable despite the rabbit's foots and all the luck that he's had. He deserves a lot of credit for being phenomenally good. And I have a lot of respect for Terry McLaurin, but otherwise he does not have a lot of weapons that any other team would really in the NFL might want to steal from that team. So, props to Jaden Daniels, but I would actually lean Detroit in this game. If I would have made a spread for this week 1 at Detroit, it would have been almost 2 touchdowns. That's clearly too much for this game, but I do think there is a little bit of signal in there. As good as Daniels has been, I have little to no respect for this Washington pass defense. They look pretty bad in my numbers. They look pretty bad in PFF grades. And this Detroit offense has simply been phenomenal after the nice performance against Minnesota, which luckily I got to see firsthand at Ford Field. They have moved to first in my adjusted passing success rate with Goff. So he's first in the NFL. And you can expect this. This unit has been phenomenal since the halfway point of the 2022 season with the same personnel. I think it's a terrible matchup. I don't think Washington stops them. When you look at the other side of the ball and you look at kind of the long-term prospects for Detroit, you have to ask whether they can overcome the injuries on the defensive side of the ball. And I don't want to go into too many details, but I kind of went through it. And yes, they're certainly very thin at defensive tackle. But I think they're kind of getting enough guys back they have enough pieces on that defense to get it done. To at least be NFL average, probably a little bit better. And with that offense, that's probably all you need.
I'm with you on a lean Detroit's way, and I'll get at a couple of potential angles to consider a bit later on once we wrap up the rundown of each game with some teaser talk. So there's a little spoiler alert, perhaps. But
Sure.
First off, Ed, while we're on this game specifically, I have 4 props I'm considering. 3 of them are quite correlated, so manage your bankrolls accordingly out there. But I'd love to get your thoughts on them. And first up, no surprise to regular listeners of this show, the patron prop of Props and Hops. Shortest touchdown under 1.5 yards. Now, this is very price dependent. I'm seeing minus 180 at BetOnline. I would play that. I think this is bettable up to minus 190. So if you're looking at DraftKings and see that price tag of minus 220, that's a pass in my book. But keep an eye on this becoming more widely available at a lot of different books closer to kickoff. From a quantitative standpoint, this game has by far the highest total on the board. More points, good for the prospects of more touchdowns. More touchdowns, good for the prospects of at least one 1-yard touchdown. And Ed, from a more qualitative standpoint, really like the fourth down aggression that we're going to see from both sides in this matchup. This is usually more of a Dan Campbell prop for me, but looking at the Commanders being in play here as well, as I suggested when teeing up the handicap for the game, this is also a Dan Quinn prop in my book this week. No surprise to me if a drive that would end in a punt or a field goal attempt for most teams sees a fourth down conversion and ends up with a snap from the 1 yard line for either of these teams. I know when we're talking a price point of minus 180 or perhaps a touch more, that can feel quite steep. But Ed, any thoughts on shortest touchdown under 1.5 yards in Washington at Detroit?
I mean, the logic definitely sounds good to me. I don't know if it's model driven, but definitely sounds like something you could probably get your hands on and dig into the play-by-play, looking at, how often you get opportunities at the 1 yard line. What is this like? What would this be priced at for an average NFL offense? Two average NFL offenses against two average.
Yeah, I think this is accounting for the total to an extent. Maybe overly so at DraftKings. I think typically I'll see this if I think about an average total, probably in the range of minus 150, minus 160. So I don't feel like we're paying too much of a premium at the extremes. Right. I think some books, especially depending on the clientele, if they cater to a more recreational base, that's why I'm surprised at the DraftKings price point. Sometimes bettors just aren't willing to lay what seems like prohibitive vig. And that's where I think relative to the true probability, minus 180, even if it goes up to minus 190, could warrant some serious consideration.
For sure. I also feel like the bets where you have to lay more is definitely a place where you can find value because, like you said, people don't want to lay that much. And I think when you get in the minus 200, minus 300 range for bets too, I've had some success in some of those markets. So I think the higher the price gets, I think that's a good thing for finding value.
Well, speaking of the minus 300 range, Ed, let's transition to the second prop I have in mind. That would be yes for a successful fourth down conversion in this matchup. I'm not seeing it out there yet, but I do think we will see it at least a few books as this one gets closer to kickoff. And the price point I have set for myself that I'm eyeing is minus 300. And if we look at the wild card round plus the regular season, Washington now 23 for 28. That's 82%, a historic success rate with their fourth down conversion attempts. Detroit obviously got the first round bye. So in the regular season, they were 22 of 33, 67% success rate. They had the third most conversions and the fourth most attempts on fourth down in the league throughout the regular season. So I feel like this one could be a good alternative if somebody can't find that shortest touchdown prop for minus 180 or better. Ed, what are your thoughts here when it comes to A, the handicap, but B, the estimate at this point when it comes to a target price of minus 300 or better for a successful fourth down conversion?
Yeah, I mean, minus 300 is what, like 75%, right? So you could probably do a quick and dirty calculation. Like, let's just assume every fourth down has a half probability. So massive under assumption, right? But let's say every fourth down probability has a half, like, a half to the whatever power is the chance that you get zero given that many number of plays, right? Mm-hmm. So I bet you only have to get to 4 or 5 attempts to find value to get the no probability less than 25%, essentially. Is that right? Yeah, because a half squared.
I'll leave it to you to do the advanced math on the fly, but I see where you're going.
Yeah, if you just had, let's say you had 2 fourth downs, right? And you had a half of a chance. So the probability that you make neither of them is 25%.
You're at 75% right there. As long as we see more than 2, then this would be plus EV, at least in theory.
Plus, you're way more likely at fourth and 1 to convert, right? Mm-hmm. So, or maybe I should be assuming something bigger for the failure. Anyways, I think you can do some simple back of the envelope. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll send it to you. But yeah, I think you can do some simple back of the envelope calculations to figure out like how many attempts you need. And if you see that both these teams are going for it like 2 times a game, you can get a pretty easy probability and then go from there.
Yeah, and one thing I will hope for, as you outline that, is perhaps a 4th and goal from the 1, giving us a 1-yard
There
touchdown
you go.
via a successful 4th down conversion.
There
So
you go.
thinking optimistically there, but also trying to keep the price front and center to think about what does constitute positive expected value for not only those two props, but one more that is similar to them, and that would be under 6 punts in the game. Similar to the 4th down prop. I'm not seeing this out there yet, but I do think we'll see it posted closer to kickoff at least a few books. And this, like the question you asked about the touchdown prop, under 6 would be accounting for the high total in this game. Typically, I think we see 7 or 7.5. So we're getting a bit of a premium attached here. But I think this one, if somebody wants to lay a flat minus 115 or better, under 6 punts may be more palatable. I first thought of this when I heard Steve Fezzik on the Even Money podcast throw it out there. And he had the thought that more 4th down attempts would naturally lead to fewer punts. So again, it's an alternative if you can't find the shortest touchdown prop at minus 180 or better, or a yes on a 4th down conversion at minus 300 or better, or if you just don't want to lay that much vig and this is a similar angle of attack. Any thoughts on that logic, Ed?
Yeah, I mean these all seem correlated. They all sound good for me. It's getting getting me motivated to start digging into some code for the Super Bowl. So this is all good, Matt.
All right, glad we can maybe kill 2 birds with 1 stone when it comes to breaking down the divisional round plus getting you prepped for the Super Bowl. And Ed, I will share one more prop for this game that's not correlated to those first 3, and that would be Washington to be the team charged with the first time out in the game. Price point of minus 130 at BetOnline. This might sound a bit peculiar, but I got some good data from Cleve TA after sharing a bet last week on this show on the Chargers being the team charged with the first time out in their game against Houston. And what I saw from TA was that Dan Campbell was the most judicious head coach in the league with his timeout usage this season. He was the second most judicious last year. And Dan Quinn, in his first season with Washington, 5th least judicious in the league. I also dug up some play-by-play data and found that Washington was charged with the first time out in 10 of its 18 games so far this season. 6 times they took that first time out before the 2-minute warning, suggesting those were not time-saving timeouts. So that can be, if you want to go there, maybe a bit more of an indictment on the organization of the team, or at least their approach to timeout management.
Right.
Detroit, on the other hand, charged with the first time out in only 6 out of the 17 games they've played so far this season. And only 3 times have the Lions burned a game's first time out before the 2-minute warning. So my takeaway here is that, yes, this is dependent on game state. Don't go unloading on a prop like this. But if we see a timeout taken before the 2-minute warning, I would estimate that it's charged to Washington probably 60 to 65% of the time. And to me, that's enough to overcome the minus 130 price point, which has a break-even probability of 56.5%. Ed, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think when you think about this prop, look, if you call a timeout in the first half, it doesn't matter, right? Like you should actually be somewhat eager to call a timeout if you don't have the right play or the right personnel or anything happens. You should never, I mean, in my opinion, you should never use that timeout if you're down in the second half, because just take the freaking penalty. You might need that timeout later to stop the clock or you'll lose the game. So in the first half, it's almost like, is one of these two offenses incompetent enough to screw up, but then competent enough to call a timeout because it doesn't matter? That, I don't know. That's kind of my thinking. So I don't know how to quantify that, but.
Yeah, this is a tough one to quantify. I will say qualitatively, it seems like Washington would be that team before the Lions would burn a timeout if they don't need to. So again, game state dependent. We might not see a timeout burned in the first 28 minutes of game time, and then it's more or less a toss-up once we're inside the final 2 minutes of a half. But at minus 130, I can't fault a small look at Washington there. If we want to turn the page, Ed, to Sunday, we've got the Rams kicking things off at Philadelphia in the early game. Eagles laying 6, total of 44. And in this one, I've got to lean to Philadelphia minus 6. I think some recency bias is keeping this line under a touchdown. The Eagles underperformed as I watched them on Sunday against Green Bay. Despite going +4 in turnovers, they seem to struggle to put away that shell of a Packers team that was left on the field. Jordan Love nursing an elbow injury. The Packers beginning the game without their best wide receiver, Christian Watson, losing 2 more receivers in game, also losing multiple offensive linemen in the game. And Not to be lost in all this, Philadelphia also losing a key cog in linebacker Nakobe Dean. In the Rams game on Monday night, I think they overperformed, rolling Minnesota, going plus 1.9 in yards per play. And that Rams defense, to me, channeled Dean Rooney from Ferris Bueller's Day Off by sacking Sam Darnold 9 times. And I'm thinking life moves pretty fast for the Rams this week. Short rest going from Monday night to that early game on Sunday, cross-country travel, another disrupted week of preparation from Los Angeles. Emotionally, I would love to see the Rams get another win, make a deep run, rally the community. But objectively, I feel like they're going to be outclassed by Philadelphia if these teams' regular season bodies of work are any indication. Ed, what do you think when it comes to this matchup between the Rams and the Eagles?
Yeah, I haven't quite finished my analysis on the game. Haven't made a final decision because I got caught up today trying to figure out how good the Rams offense was when they had both Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua versus when they didn't. And so you separate out stuff. And, I was a little surprised. Like, look, in general, they're above average pass offense, not top 10, but still good. And then you only look at the games that you have both of them. I thought the jump would be more. They end up jumping a little bit, but it's not drastic, right? We'll talk about another calculation like this, which is very drastic. But so haven't made my final decision about that. I kind of want to make the case for the Rams. The last time these two teams played, Saquon just utterly destroyed them. Big plays. And, is that going to happen again? Well, sure, it could. But I'm sure the Rams are going to sell out to stop Saquon Barkley. And if you really want to sell out to stop one player, you can probably do it. We've seen plenty of examples with this with running quarterbacks in college and actually last week, how Tampa Bay, defended Jaden Daniels. And if you want to stop one player, you can do it. It comes at a cost, but you can probably do it. So I'm looking at so the cost is obviously you got to deal with AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Hurts. I'm looking at Jalen Hurts' numbers, and he's like right at NFL average when I look at my adjusted success rate. And the player a tick above him is Drake May. Now, when you think about these two guys having basically league average numbers, it's kind of laughable, right? Because Hurts is the veteran. He's like supposed to be the leader that could potentially win an MVP, almost won an MVP a couple years ago. He's at NFL average, which I think is disappointing. Like he had kind of ticked above. Like he's usually near NFL average, but the trend had been going up, and you would expect it to kind of keep going up. And then Drake May, who is a rookie, and any rookie that can get to NFL average, you have to consider that just a smashing success. But then you look at his weapons, right? Like he doesn't have anything near AJ Brown or Devonta Smith to work with. He's got Hunter Henry as his most fearsome target out there. The guy, that player that the defense just fears and has to go all out to stop, right?
Chargers legend, Hunter Henry.
That's right. So, anyways, that's been something I've been thinking about today. I think you sell out to stop Barkley and you make Hurts beat you. And of course that can happen, but I don't know. I might be on Rams in this game. And my number is, and I got Philly by 5. That's what the model says.
Gotcha. And I do have a question as you talk about the likelihood of the Rams selling out to stop Barkley. I wonder if that might jack up the variance a bit, because if it's going to be feast or famine for the Eagles in the passing game, maybe that increases the likelihood of a blowout in Philadelphia's favor or an outright win for the Rams. Does that approach how you look at this game in terms of the point spread versus maybe some alt lines or a money line?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's definitely worth thinking about that. Obviously, if you knew exactly what the Rams were going to do, that would make this all the easier. And I certainly don't have any type of inside information about this. I'm just trying to guess at things. But I think the logic does make sense. And I think kind of finding these games where the outliers are more likely is definitely a good strategy for finding value.
All right, so it might be a high variance setting in Philadelphia on Sunday, perhaps a bit lower variance when we look at the nightcap, Baltimore at Buffalo. Feel like we're saving the best for last here, arguably the two best teams in the league. The Ravens, a 1-point favorite at Buffalo right now, total 51.5. And I'm not sold on Baltimore is the favorite here, yet I'm in no rush to bet the Bills plus a point. based on your analysis at the power rank, Ed, I'm thinking that thought is probably mutual. So tell us what your numbers say about this game. And while all eyes are going to be on both offenses, starring our two MVP candidates, what you take away from your analysis of Baltimore's defensive performance over the arc of the season.
For sure. I mean, my number has Buffalo by about 1.5 at home. And, this is actually the game that suggests the most value out of any of the four, right? Taking Buffalo +1, +1.5, I think was available earlier today at home. But before I did that, I had to check whether Baltimore's defense has improved over the course of the year, in particular their pass defense. This unit with a lot of the same players was second in the league under Mike McDonald last year in my adjusted passing success rate. Very good unit. You changed coordinators this year, and they got off to a pretty rough start. They've been better recently, and I didn't really want to bias it in terms of any particular week when maybe they got better. So I just picked to look at their first 8 games versus the remaining 10 games, and the change is insane. So passing success rate. This is after my opponent adjustments. The first 8 games, Baltimore was 26th. They've been first for the rest of the season. There's a lot of volatility in predicting defensive performance. I don't want to make too much of this, but I do think there's been a change in what they're doing, whether the coordinator is getting things figured out. I've been talking to some other people today, and they pointed out the change in position of Kyle Hamilton, who's obviously an elite player in the Baltimore secondary. That apparently started week 12. My analysis is a little different. Started a little bit earlier because I didn't really want to bias when I chose to start looking at the second half of the season versus the first. I also make adjustments for strength of schedule, which I think is pretty important. But there has been a big difference, and that makes me not interested in the spread at all, despite the fact that my overall number says 2B. I think this has the potential to be an all-time great. I hope there's not a lot of variance around a pick because I really want to see a great game with 2 phenomenal quarterbacks at the top of their game. I want to see that game go down to the wire, and I hope we get that.
And when we're looking at a tight point spread without a lot of variance, easy to anticipate, I'm going to look to the prop betting market here for a couple angles that may be actionable. First off, going to go back to the well with that shortest touchdown prop under 1.5 yards. This one, I'm seeing a price point of -180 at both BetOnline and DraftKings. That would be my cutoff in this matchup. Similar handicap to Washington, Detroit with the high total. Good for the prospects of more points, more touchdowns, and thus at least one 1-yard touchdown. With the added qualitative component here of Baltimore going to work in short yardage situations with either Derrick Henry or the tush push with Mark Andrews, and Buffalo also capable using the push with Josh Allen. A possible fly in the ointment here for me is the weather. I'm seeing a forecast calling for temperatures in the teens, a chance of snow showers, which would be really fun to watch on TV, but maybe not great for passing output. If this has a scoring impact, that could maybe affect the number of bites at the apple that these teams could get from the 1-yard line. But given all available current information, I do like it enough to get in play at -180 or better. Ed, any thoughts on your end at the prospects of a 1-yard touchdown in Ravens-Bills?
Yeah, I do like that. I do like the logic. I think I wouldn't worry about snow or cold. Just check the wind and check how the total moves. And then also, the tush push. Jim Sonis gave me a nugget a couple weeks ago about Josh Allen, anytime touchdown score, and then 2+ touchdown scores. And luckily, that happened to be the game against Detroit. And I'm pretty sure the second touchdown happened in the first half. So a lot of his logic was that they're tush pushing a lot, and that's exactly what we saw. So, I like both. I like both the shortest touchdown under 1.5 yard.
All right, glad to hear that. And I will get more conventional with my second prop look in this game. Contingent on him playing, but I hope he does, and I hope we get a crack at Zay Flowers receiving yards under. This line not available at the moment. Flowers didn't practice today, unlikely to practice tomorrow, although John Harbaugh has said he could possibly play without practicing this week. And when I looked at his over-unders before he sustained his injury in week 18, he was posted in the high 50s to low 60s from a yardage standpoint. I think in this one, the injury would be taken account to an extent if Flowers is announced in. So I'm targeting the under at 53.5 yards or better. My handicap here is that player props are often skewed toward a guy being in, constituting a guy being in at 100%, and failing to price in the limitations of an injury, especially when players give it a go in the playoffs with an injury that would probably sideline them for a regular season game. I think we're also getting a bit of a free roll on weather impacting the pass game. But overall, Ed, curious about your thoughts on the handicap here, as well as whether or not you think I might be in the ballpark targeting a price point of under 53.5 yards or better if Flowers is announced in and if this line gets posted.
Yeah, I mean, I think under. I mean, what would he normally be priced at? Probably in the
high
60s.
50s, low 60s.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get that number, the under sounds pretty good. I would offer a word of warning. The Jeremiah Love rush total for Notre Dame's running back was, in the 90s for most of the season. And then again, in the semifinal against Penn State, he was hurt, had a knee injury, and was priced at 33.5. And my thought was like, yeah, look, somebody knows something. He's not 100%. That's clearly the market saying that he's not going to perform as well. And who knows, if he was completely healthy, his total might be in the 60s instead of the 90s in deference to Penn State's defense. Anyways, he comes out and in the broadcast they're talking about, oh, yeah, he's fine, but he's not supposed to hurdle anyone. And in the second half, he just goes off and hurdles someone. So you never know how these – and he goes over and, he had about 40 rushing yards, which I still think is like which is a nod to the markets being basically on that he wasn't 100% and, that they were pretty close to what he ended up rushing for. So an example of where the under might not work out, but I do think, if you're getting anywhere near where Flowers is priced during the regular season, I think the under makes a ton of sense. I mean, especially if he's not practicing now. I actually kind of thought he was going to play. Like, I've been assuming he's going to play, but if he's not practicing, that's a bigger chance that he doesn't play. And, and a bigger chance that he just doesn't get as many routes, right?
Yeah, this may all wind up being a moot point, but if he does play, I'm trying to give it a discount. He would not be priced in all likelihood in line with where he was prior to the injury. I'm just not sold that the discounted price books would be discounted enough.
Okay. I mean, but what if it were 40 or 30? 35?
Yeah, everything in my book is price dependent. So if they hang something extreme to the low end, then I'm just going to pass. No hesitation.
Yeah.
Hopefully we get something in the 50s and can give it a look, but we will stand by and see what happens there. And in the meantime, Ed, want to talk through some teaser scenarios, which to me are showing promise, given that this is just a 4-game slate. I have a 6-point teaser in mind that I think is actionable right now, as well as a couple 6.5-point teaser scenarios that I think it could be useful to outline and people could be ready to bet if and when the market moves accordingly. Starting with a 6-point teaser, 2 teams good at -120 or better. Kansas City -2.5 at Houston. This is probably the obvious slam dunk of the week. The Chiefs being the superior team at home, needing to do little more than win outright and taking a free roll on Kansas City getting that so-called playoff bump. And in this one, I would pair the Chiefs with Philadelphia, taking the Eagles down to pick them. Now, this is a non-Wong teaser leg because we're not crossing through the 7. And while it's rare, it's not impossible for non-Wong teaser legs to be positive expected value. I think this one may be one of those rare exceptions. A reference point for me is to look at the Philadelphia money line here, thinking that in 2-team 6-point teasers, when you're laying -120, you're laying about -285 on each individual leg, the way the math works out. And at Circa right now, I'm seeing the Eagles -280 on the money line. That's just short of that -285 threshold, but it's a close call. And to me, it's close enough to justify pairing the Eagles with the Chiefs in a teaser for a reduced amount, given the significant appeal I think Kansas City brings to a 6-point teaser. And one more reference point I'll throw out there, speaking of money lines, if we want to look at a Chiefs-Eagles money line parlay, that's going to go for about -155. So the teaser here, betting on a very similar outcome. It is possible Kansas City wins the game outright, but doesn't cover the teaser leg. But I think it's well worth that 35-cent discount on a teaser here. Any thoughts on your end, Ed, when it comes to Kansas City -2.5, teased with Philadelphia down to pick 'em?
I mean, the Kansas City leg makes perfect sense to me. This is the kind of game. I think it's close. I think Kansas City wins and probably by a field goal. So, and then the other one, I mean, my only hesitation is that I think I might like the Rams in this game, even with the respect that I have for the Eagles. So, I think my handicap is not favoring that, but I'm not too concerned about it not going through 7, right? It is going through 3, and that's good.
Yeah, that's fair. Good to be aware of the key numbers here, but also a handicap on the game itself. So, of course, if you lean, or especially if you like the Rams, could understand why there would be trepidation about teasing the Eagles in any way, shape, or form. So, moving on from that one, Ed, I'm thinking about a couple of 6.5-point teaser scenarios. These would be actionable in my book at -130 or better. The first one is contingent on those 9.5s ticking back down to -9 for Detroit, in which case I would be quick to tease Detroit down to -2.5 hosting Washington, kind of like Kansas City, the superior team at home, needing to do a little more than win outright. A word of caution I'd have here is something we touched on earlier, 4th down variance. That could drive Detroit to blow out Washington, but it might also keep Washington alive to win the game outright. So it would be a slightly reduced wager amount for me, as teasers are inherently bets against variance, but I can see plenty of appeal to getting the Lions down through that key number of 3 and pairing them with Buffalo in a 6.5-point teaser up to +7.5 hosting Baltimore. I think it's fair to say Baltimore is the better team. I'm still not convinced they should be favored at Buffalo. Now, full disclosure here, I teased Baltimore with Kansas City when the Ravens opened a 1.5-point underdog at a few books. So at current odds, I would still be just as happy to tease Buffalo in the final game of this divisional round slate. Any thoughts on your end, Ed, if Detroit comes down 0.5 point to putting them in a 6.5-point teaser with the home underdog in the Bills?
Yeah, I mean, I like teasing Detroit. I mean, like I said, I would lean towards them in this game. Washington's going to need a couple miracles to win that game. So, yeah, I like that one for sure. And that, along with Kansas City, you're taking the top 2 seeds. I think we expect them to move along. I think they can cover small numbers.
All right, and if Detroit doesn't re-enter 6.5-point teaser territory, or if they do and don't cover their teaser leg for some reason, not all hope is lost with Buffalo. We're going to know the NFC Championship game matchup before kickoff, so it's possible that there could be a 6.5-point teaser worth betting, pairing Buffalo in the divisional round with an NFC Championship game matchup. I think the most likely candidates, if we get the right NFC Championship game matchup to pair with Buffalo in a 6.5-point teaser, would be Philadelphia if they're at Detroit, or Philadelphia if they're hosting Washington, or in the unlikeliest of scenarios, Washington if they're at the Rams. Any thoughts, Ed, on this scenario of teasing a divisional round game with a perhaps fitting NFC Championship game, since that matchup will be known prior to Ravens-Bills kicking off?
I think that's interesting. I would just wonder how much you could get down on that, right? With the market just opening up on that NFC, the conference championship game. I mean, how much are you going to be able to get down on that?
Yeah,
who knows?
that's
I
right.
mean, maybe there's a bug in their code and they'll let you get down whatever.
Yeah, and it might depend a bit on how competitive the game is leading up to Bills-Ravens. If the Eagles or Rams are just running away with it, we might see that game open before the fourth quarter even begins. Sure. So the market could get a decent bit of liquidity before Baltimore and Buffalo kick off. So again, this is something that, to your point, not going to be available for full limits. It might not be viable at all if we don't get an NFC Championship game matchup that warrants a 6.5-point teaser leg. Just thinking out loud here, anticipating a good use case for Buffalo if things do fall into place as far as the NFC is concerned.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. All right. Well, Ed, I think as we've run through the divisional round, I sensed a lean to Houston, a lean to Detroit, a lean to the Rams, and maybe more neutral than anything on Baltimore, Buffalo.
Very
Am I mischaracterizing any of those games, or is there anything else that we haven't dug into yet that you do consider actionable for this divisional round?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I have right now. I think you covered it. I will be looking into interception props and things like that soon. And actually, hopefully next week when I do have some time, I would actually like to crank through some numbers on maybe QB passing yards and stuff. So we'll have some more there. But yeah, you basically covered it.
Well, you teased it when it comes to quarterback interception props. That seems like your bread and butter. And I'd love to dive into that process a bit, because last week on the Football Analytics Show, you noted that quarterback interception props have been priced differently in the regular season as opposed to the playoffs. value typically on over half an interception in the regular season last year, and then you saw value on some unders in the playoffs. How would you say that pricing is looking this season, considering playoffs versus regular season?
Yeah, I mean, I did have Jordan Love under half an interception last week. Certainly didn't work out, but maybe the same type of idea. Yeah, we'll see. I haven't looked this week, so there were definitely a couple of Jared Goff unders last year that hit, which was really nice. I mean, look, this guy is as good as he gets at not putting the football into dangerous situations, and that's the rate that I use to predict interceptions in the future. And Matt, there's never going to be like an easier player prop model ever again, right? A lot of things are random. Like basically, if you do the research, like the defense doesn't really have a lot of control over stuff. It's all about the quarterback and his decision making and how often he puts the ball in danger. So, anyways, I'm just reminiscing. We've been up on the interception props for members of the power rank this year, but it hasn't been like the bonanza that it was last year. The books have gotten a lot better at that, which is sad. There's still definitely been some value, and the number of bets has kind of picked up later in the season, which has been nice. I think our record with the bets that I've sent out to members could have been even better, except for there have been some bad losses in there as well. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm hoping for some Goff unders. I definitely like Jared Goff unders. I like Baker Mayfield overs. This analysis also had Baker Mayfield to lead the NFL in interceptions for the regular season, and that one, which was pretty awesome. It was pretty nice that Kirk Cousins got benched so they could tie at the end of the year. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing because it like the number said a lot about Caleb Williams unders this year, and so basically that 8 games where he didn't throw a pick, yes. A lot of that was good fortune, but there was actually some signal in there as well. He's been really good at not putting the football in dangerous situations. Yeah, Baker Mayfield overs, Bryce Young unders. So it's the model's been good and going to keep cranking away at it.
So I'm sensing from you, books have gotten better at pricing this. You maybe haven't done all your work for the divisional round quite yet. It does sound like you're leaning toward a Jared Goff under if the right price presents itself. Anything else when it comes to your point of view at this stage on quarterback interception props specific to the divisional round?
Yeah, I mean, the model's always like Lamar under. So I would look towards that as well. Although, I mean, he's been priced at like minus 150 for the last half of the season, so no value there. I think we had one Jackson that. So yeah.
Okay, with a 4-game slate, it can be a little bit bare bones, but I think that process worth keeping in mind based on what may still unfold throughout the course of these playoffs, and also as we get ready to do some handicapping for the 2025 season, which is going to not feel all that far away after we get clear of Super Bowl Sunday. Ed, a lot of good stuff when it comes to the football side of things. Also, always have to make sure to weave in a proper hops segment when I've got you on the show. And as a springboard for this week's segment, last week, I evacuated due to nearby wildfires in LA, and a massive silver lining for me was that my best friend's dad had a vacation house available for my wife and I just outside of Las Vegas. And during that getaway, I really enjoyed Atomic Duck IPA by Able Baker Brewing. It had a classic combo of citrus, tropical fruit, and pine notes, and it rekindled my appreciation for a widely available, relatively affordable local craft beer that can serve as a strong staple. So in that sense, any strong staples in your book, in your neck of the woods in the Ann Arbor area?
Yeah, nothing new to report, Matt, but I am definitely still working on my cocktail game. That's kind of something I'm most excited about. I make a lot of old fashions. It's the only way I can get people to continue to hang out with me in Ann Arbor because I'm so annoying, But I was lucky enough to go to a party-ish type thing, and there was a guy that like actually blew my cocktail away. He had some simple syrup with some tea and some other stuff in there, and was actually making his own bitters, and it was really phenomenal. It was really good. So I'm trying to advance that. I'm trying to think about like working a little bit of a ginger flavor into the old fashioned. I think that's a flavor that would work pretty well with the bourbon, with the bitters in there. So kind of like when you make the simple syrup, putting some ginger in there. That's kind of the idea right now. So I'm going to be experimenting with that over the holiday season. Do you have friends doing this dry January stuff?
I think in LA, dry January went out the window by
Right.
the second week of the year because of everything that
True.
happened. So it definitely have heard people talking about it, but maybe a damp January at
Yeah.
best out this way.
Personally, I really like wet January. With all the football out there, it is a good time to get together with friends and have some drinks and have a good time. So as a part of my wet January, I'm going to be making some cocktails, hopefully with a little bit of ginger in there. So hopefully get to that this weekend.
I like your point about playing to the time of year, and I get why a lot of people would want to gravitate toward a dry January. But as a sports fan, I feel like if I were to give things a break for a month, this would not be it. I would
Right.
probably earmark right after the Super Bowl
Yes.
to right before March Madness tips off.
Thank you very much. Yes. Why not have a dry after the Super Bowl? Hashtag dry after the Super Bowl. Can we get that started on the social media?
I'm with you. Yeah, we'll see what we can accomplish there. And Ed, speaking of accomplishing some good things, also want to wrap this up with the Malinsky Minute. And I think you're quite accomplished when it comes to outdoor activities, which was a passion of Dave's as well. A shared passion for you and myself would be running. I was going to run the Rose Bowl half marathon this Sunday until it was postponed due to the wildfires. But not deterred, I'm going to stay in the mode of staying ready so I don't have to get ready. And Ed, as far as you're concerned, I'm wondering how you describe your current running routine and maybe any organized events that you've got on the horizon.
Yeah, I had a really good block over the fall. Felt pretty fast. Took a couple of weeks off over break. Kind of slowly getting back into it. Honestly, running has not been the biggest priority in the last couple of weeks since the kids went back to school. A lot of work going on, obviously, with the power rank and the football playoffs going on. Definitely could have put. I mean, I guess I could have put more emphasis on getting a longer run in today, but somehow managed to schedule 4 podcasts for today. So it seemed like a better idea to focus on that. I do have some goals for what me and my friend are calling a cold half marathon in April. We usually run we usually run one in the beginning of June in Ann Arbor, and it's a great race with an awesome course and tons of fast people. It's a great race, and I will run it again, but it's always hot, and I'm too old to do hot. So I'm trying to find something cold in April, which means I kind of got to train right through like when I'm busy in March. So kind of getting mentally ready for that. Matt, you did bring the whole outdoor thing up with David. And I did want to, that reminded me of something that I just stumbled upon recently. I just got signed up for a subscription to Mountain Gazette. I don't know if you ever heard of this.
No.
So it is an independent magazine that only publishes twice a year. This is like a new thing that you can have kind of like a small niche type magazine. You only have to publish twice a year, make it nice. And, Mountain Gazette, it just looks really interesting. It's got like an owner that was like, I'm going to take this magazine that's gone out of business twice, and I think I can make it work. And they focus on photography, they focus on long form writing, and it talks about like the idea is like being outdoors and going skiing in the winter and being outside in the spring. And yeah, so I just subscribed and give my first issue. Really looking forward to digging through that. And it's kind of like a smallish publication, but supposedly it has like 24,000 subscribers.
Nice.
So I'm interested in checking that out. I can't really give it a full plug yet since I haven't actually seen it I actually haven't held it in my hands, but it is kind of interesting. Like you can't even buy the old issues on the website. Like I was able to get like the very last issue because I subscribed and they're like, hey, we have some extra copies of this last one, but it's not like you can even go on. Like they don't have like, I don't know, like a catalog of just past issues. Like they just print enough for subscribers. Like there's no concept of newsstand at all.
That sounds like a unique concept.
What's that?
It sounds like quite the unique concept.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's they talk about it's like, look, traditional magazines are going way too digital and way too much towards advertising. Let's go the completely other way and go completely to subscribers and no newsstand at all.
I can appreciate them giving that a shot, and I can really appreciate you mentioning that on the show in this segment. As you said that, I thought, geez, I mean, for anybody watching this on YouTube or the video feed on Spotify, I've got pictures that David Malinsky took on Mount Charleston above the Las Vegas Valley over both of my shoulders here. I think he would have been their first subscriber if he got the chance. So it sounds very fitting, and now I have a homework assignment to look into it for myself once we wrap this conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, check it out. I mean, it was something that kind of just came across my radar over break. And, I mean, it's kind of, I think it's like what, $80 for 2 issues over the year. So it's not cheap, but like you get, it's like buying 2 coffee table books in some sense.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, part of it seems like a very worthy cause to support as well. And Ed, I want to thank you for supporting the cause of this podcast. Hearing you say that you snuck 4 shows into your agenda for today, that is quite the feat. I want to let you get to your evening and carry on with the rest of your life. So I'll go ahead and wrap us up here by thanking the audience for tuning in. A friendly reminder to check out Ed's work at thepowerrank.com. Follow him on Twitter if you're not doing so already at The Power Rank, and also check out his show, The Football Analytics Show, wherever you get your podcasts. I'll be back with another guest next week to break down the conference championship round. Ed, thanks as always for your time and insight. Best of luck this weekend, the rest of the NFL playoffs, and beyond.
Matt, thanks so much for having me on.